Hey guys. Tonight we return together to the quiet moments after bloody battles, where the victory horns have gone silent, the flags have been lowered, and only one haunting question remains that few dare to ask. What happened to the bodies after the battle? From the cold stone graves of the Neanderthals to the reeking fields of medieval wars, and even the teeth of dead soldiers turned into dentures for the British elite tonight. You'll uncover a part of history that if you were the main character, you probably wouldn't survive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching this video from? Comment your city and current time, so we can see just how many time zones we're traveling through together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Back in a time when corpses still held commercial value, and farmland was sometimes fertilized with human bones. You're imagining an ancient scene, aren't you? A soft breeze drifting across the fields, the sun already dipped behind the hills, and in the midst of that peaceful landscape lie hundreds, maybe thousands of bodies, still resting where they fell. Let's begin with a rather well-known event, the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. You might not remember the name, but that was when the ancient Greeks faced the formidable army of King Philip II of Macedonia, yes, the father of Alexander the Great. After the spears had snapped, the shields cracked, and the gods no longer answered prayers, what came next? Not a triumphal song, but the collection of corpses. Yes, that's right. The ancient Greeks placed great importance on burial. Even in war, they tried to bring the fallen home for proper rites. Unless, of course, you were a Spartan, in which case you were buried right on the battlefield. And not stripped of your gear. Quite the luxury in that context, don't you think the Spartans had an unwritten rule that's quite fascinating? If you died in battle, you got a tombstone with your name. If you died of old age or slipped in the bath, sorry, nothing. Oh, and the only exception was women who died during childbirth. They too were honored with tombstones. Perhaps in the eyes of the Spartans, childbirth was its own form of warfare. Feeling a slight shiver now? Don't worry, because the next story might just make you chuckle. In ancient Rome, soldiers had to set aside a portion of their salary each month, not to buy better armor, but to prepay for their own funeral. They were more serious about their death than about lunch. At least the Romans tried to bury their dead properly. In medieval Europe, well, forget it. Perhaps war was too frequent, or people were too busy looting after the battle. So burial became more of a side option. The famous Bayeux tapestry, you know, the one as long as a football field, depicts English and Norman soldiers not burying the dead, but stripping armor, taking belts, and checking wallets. Strangely enough, despite the non-stop battles in medieval Europe, archaeologists rarely find mass graves from these battles. In fact, there's even a scientific paper titled, "Where Are the Dead of Medieval Battles?" And yes, no one has a satisfying answer. Historians still debate this. Some say the bodies were scattered or eaten by animals. Others believe locals quietly handled them to prevent disease. But there's also a darker theory that after being looted, the corpses were left in the fields for many winters. Now close your eyes and imagine you're a soldier in the Battle of Heilsberg, 1807. You're badly wounded, fallen in the snow. Around you, hundreds are dying. A man from the logistics team approaches you, think he's come to save you. But no, he takes your boots and your clothes, even while you're still breathing. A French soldier named Jean-Baptiste once wrote about the feeling of waking up from unconsciousness, naked in the snow, with only a hat and one shoe. And you perhaps wrapped in a warm blanket hearing this story with a slight smile. Thank God I wasn't born in the 19th century. But do you know what's even more chilling? The jaws of dead soldiers became luxury items. Young, healthy teeth were pulled straight from the battlefield and sold to Britain for dentures. They were called Waterloo teeth. Yes, Elegant British gentlemen and ladies were talking, laughing, chewing cakes with the teeth of fallen boys. And there's more. Human bones were crushed, bagged, and sold as fertilizer. British newspapers at the time sarcastically wrote, "We send soldiers to fight in Europe, then import their bones to fertilize crops in Yorkshire." A sentence that is funny, painful, and tragically economical. But don't panic. History has its moments of grace too. During the American Civil War, both sides had teams dedicated to burying the dead, trying to preserve basic dignity. And in World War II, there was even a unit called the Graves Registration Service, tasked with finding, identifying, and burying fallen American soldiers in accordance with their faith. A quiet, often overlooked job, but deeply humane. And as you drift into sleep or lie awake listening under the soft golden glow, our journey continues through fields of death, echoing with the whispers of history. You know, in World War I, things became much more complicated. The front stretched for hundreds of kilometers, shelling was constant, and corpses lay scattered for weeks without burial. Many soldiers died without identification, prompting the erection of anonymous monuments across the world. And that's when the term unknown soldier was born, as a way to honor all the invisible souls who died in wars they did not choose. Strangely enough, on many fronts, dogs were trained to locate bodies. Yes, you heard that right. Small, loyal service dogs would pass through rubble to mark the positions of the dead, helping medics or burial teams work more efficiently. Perhaps in a world where humans were killing each other, it was the animals who showed a trace of compassion. Meanwhile, during World War II, the Germans had detailed guidelines on how to construct mass graves. They had to be near railroads for transport convenience, with clear pathways, so the site could later be turned into a proper cemetery. A plan written with precise diagrams, but war rarely follows blueprints. Those instructions were soon abandoned as reality turned brutal, and people were buried where they fell without trumpets, without ceremony. Modern historians still debate, does careful burial reduce the brutality of war? Or is it merely a thin veneer over a brutal truth? Some argue that the way a civilization treats its dead is the deepest reflection of its morality. And you see across eras, from the glory of Greece, the discipline of Rome, to the chaos of the Middle Ages, death remains the silent companion of war. But not all are laid to rest equally. Some get statues, engraved names. Others become crushed bone fertilizer or dentures in a noble's mouth. The strangest tale. Perhaps the Waterloo finger. A Victorian gentleman once brought back a finger from a dead soldier, dropped it in a bottle of gin, and placed it on a shelf as a war memento. You think that's a joke? It's not. The past had very vivid ways of remembering. And what about today? Though modern warfare involves satellites, drones, and tech, death still happens quietly. And the dead still need burial. There are UN teams whose sole task is to retrieve and identify the dead in conflict zones. A silent but deeply humane job. Isn't it strange humanity has gone from burying people under stone to making fertilizer and false teeth, and then circling back to headstones and reverence? Perhaps after everything, death still teaches us one lesson about fragility and how we treat those who can no longer speak for themselves. Tonight's story isn't just about death, but how humanity remembers or forgets it. Because the most frightening thing isn't dying, but dying without recognition, without being remembered as a person. In the 19th century, as wars swept across Europe, nameless soldiers became resources for both sides, fighting in life, then becoming post-war material, from dentures to ashes scattered on fields. Some call it cruelty. Others more coldly called it efficient reuse. But over time, we began asking the question, were the dead ever truly laid to rest? Take Verdun, for example, one of the longest, most brutal battles of World War I. Hundreds of thousands of French and German soldiers died. Yet even now, thousands of bodies remain unfound. They are called les disparus, the vanished. And in the wind that sweeps through the trees of Verdun, perhaps their nameless whispers still remain. There's a strange truth that few notice in many cultures. The human body was once a symbol of the sacred. But when war breaks out, the human form becomes the first thing to be abandoned. A general once said, "In victory we count soldiers. In defeat we count bodies." Cold but true. And you know, even today, with satellites and advanced tracking equipment, there are still mass graves that have never been unearthed. In the Balkans, the Middle East Africa people are still digging layer by layer, searching for the names that disappeared from the birth registry. Modern historians continue to debate, should we excavate to restore identity to the dead, or let them rest in peace? One side says, science serves truth. The other replies, peace needs no name. What do you think right now? Maybe you're lying quietly in bed, your phone or laptop beside you, the light off or just a faint yellow glow in the corner of the room. My voice soft, slightly sardonic, still playing steadily like the ticking of a quiet evening clock. But inside you, perhaps a door is opening, one where you're not just hearing a story, but truly feeling the cold of battle, the silence after gunfire, and the unspoken ache never written in history books. And if tonight you fall asleep with even a small thought about how humanity treats one another in those final moments, then perhaps the dead, the nameless corpses, the anonymous bones, the Waterloo teeth will rest a little easier. By the way, if you're still awake, take a look around. The blanket you're under may not be Spartan armor, but at least no one's trying to strip it off you right now, and that might be the greatest fortune of all we've just discussed. Funny, isn't it, that the biggest blessing of the day might simply be no one's digging a hole for you, dragging your legs, or pulling your teeth. Of course, not every part of history is as bleak as a deserted graveyard at midnight. Some moments are so strange if you didn't hear them from me, you'd think they were fiction. For example, in Victorian England, there was an entire market for battlefield souvenirs, not armor or weapons, but human bones, fingers, teeth, even bits of skull carved into paperweights. One gentleman bragged, "I have a Waterloo fingernail preserved in gin to keep its natural color." Yes, gin, the strong liquor. People used to store hand bones in gin like you might hide sadness behind a cup of warm tea. It sounds bizarre, but it reveals something profound. Humans aren't great at letting go. No matter how brutal the war, we try to hold on to something, a button, a bloody scrap of fabric, a tooth. As if by keeping it, we stay connected to what was lost even in grief. And do you see, history isn't just about winners and losers. It's about the smaller things, who buries whom, who is remembered, who is forgotten, and who becomes fertilizer. I know you're probably thinking, how am I supposed to sleep with my head full of mass graves and dentures from dead soldiers? But truly, there is a quiet peace in stories like these. Because amid all the chaos, all the wars, there are still people like you, like me, who quietly ask, are we doing the right thing? Are the dead being honored? And it's that question, not victory, that makes us still human. Now then, I know your breathing has started to slow. Your body is sinking into a state of rest. Your heartbeat is steady, your breath even. Maybe your eyes closed back when I spoke of the blood-stained armor at Verdun. Or maybe they're still open, but your gaze has softened, distant, as if you're looking through centuries. Either way, you're still here in the warm space of this story, where the ghosts of history aren't frightening, they simply want to be heard and told again. Because nights like this, when everything is quiet, when your mind drifts into that hazy place between waking and sleep, are the perfect time for the quiet memories of history to return. Do you hear it? Not the fan, not the distant cars, but a faint whisper, as if rising from the earth. It's the voice of those who once lived, once fought, once loved, and then vanished without a name in any textbook. People often think history is written in triumphs and victories. But you and I both know most of history is built from nameless lives. Fallen soldiers with no monument, no poem, just a quiet resting place that may not be discovered for 1,000 years. There's something gentle yet haunting in this during World War II. The burial units didn't just handle paperwork. They learned to recognize each religion so that if a soldier was Jewish, they would face the grave toward Jerusalem. If Christian, a small cross was placed above. And if the faith was unknown, they buried them with all the respect they could give. I think there's a very human beauty in that act. No matter who you were, what side you fought on, why you died once you lay down, someone still tried to do the right thing for you, even if it was just a patch of earth and a plain wooden marker. And do you know what's strange? Many soldiers survived the war, but it was the memory of the unburied that haunted them for life. Some were not afraid to die, but feared being forgotten, left behind in a field with no one to know, no one to look. Is it possible that there's a part of all of us like that? Not exactly afraid of death, but afraid that in the end, no one will remember we were here, but you are here. Listening, remembering, and thinking of them. That alone on a night as quiet as this is enough to call the name of a soul long at rest. A very quiet night, isn't it? The room's still dim, everything has softened. And if you're still awake, I want you to know you are not alone. It's not just me telling you stories. There's a whole stream of history flowing with you. People who lived, who passed, and who still whisper through the generations, if only someone will listen. Tomorrow, you may not remember the names of the battles, the generals, or the dentures from ancient wars. But you'll remember the feeling that every person, no matter where they fell, deserves to be remembered. Do you remember we talked about bones, teeth, fingers, and gin bottles? Hard to believe, isn't it? But you know there's another side to the dead after battle that few pay attention to, and it doesn't lie beneath the ground, but in art, literature, and the collective dreamscape. Imagine this. You step into an old church somewhere in Europe. The air inside is cool, scented with damp stone and candle wax. On the ceiling, paintings depict scenes of war, faces full of sorrow, arms reaching up from the earth, not to be saved, but as if to say, "Do not forget us." In Renaissance literature, depictions of the battlefield weren't just about blood and fire, but deeply philosophical reflections on the body, the soul, and mankind's cruelty to itself. There's a poem by a British soldier from World War I, where he writes that what he fears isn't death, but the feeling of being left behind without anyone calling his name. Strangely, the most painful thing wasn't falling, but the sense of being forgotten in silence. And here, I want to invite you on another journey, not through time, but through how different civilizations have treated their war dead. In feudal Japan, after battle, the bodies of samurai were not just buried. They were carefully washed, redressed in armor hair, tied neatly, sword placed by their side, as if they were still guarding their clan. It wasn't just a ritual. It was continuation, so the dead would go on living as part of the family's honor. In some African tribes, when war ended, they sang for the dead. No tombstones, no grand graves, but each year the village gathered to sing the names of those who had fallen. Because as long as someone says your name, you are not truly dead. A simple philosophy, but one that silences the heart. So what about us in the modern world? What are we doing with the memory of those who died after war? You've probably heard of national cemeteries, places like Arlington in the US, or Trang Son Cemetery in Vietnam. These places are tended to with flags, flowers, and ceremonies. But do you know beyond those, there are still thousands, tens of thousands who have no marker at all? There are elderly mothers still waiting for their sons. There are lands where, as you walk, you don't know you're stepping on what was once a battlefield. Not because people wanted to forget, but because time is always too busy to remember the quiet things. And that is exactly why you're hearing this story. Because you, among the noise of countless videos, chose to listen to something quiet, something small, something many people overlook. Maybe you're thinking, I'm not a historian. I can't change anything. But it'll tell you something very real. The fact that you're listening, caring, and feeling, that's what keeps the memory of millions alive. You have done and are doing something most never think of. You've turned your small room, your pair of headphones, into a silent memorial. And tonight, wherever you are, a rented room, a house by the sea, or a quiet moment inside a noisy city, you've created a memory space. A place without war, just stories, gentle light, and a stream of time flowing through your softened awareness. And because you are still here in the gentle breath of night, we will continue going deeper into the things others avoid mentioning, don't dare remember, or were never taught. Let's speak of something very real, yet rarely asked aloud. What happens when a soldier falls but leaves behind no body, no armor, no boots, not a single strand of hair for DNA, no gravestone, no homecoming, nothing but a name on a list so long it seems to vanish into nothingness? In the Vietnam War, over 1,500 American soldiers were classified as MIA, missing in action. And not just Americans. Many Vietnamese soldiers from both sides also disappeared without a trace. Not because the enemy hid the bodies, but sometimes simply because war consumes everything. Thick jungle, landslides, bombs tearing up the earth, and time, needing no excuse, erases all evidence. But the living did not let go. Vietnamese mothers for decades after the war still climbed mountains, walked into fields, burned incense, and called out their sons' names as if they'd just stepped out, not yet back for dinner. In the US, there are entire organizations that have spent decades doing just one thing: searching for remains. They pore over old military maps, read every surviving comrade's journal, and when they find a clue, they drill into the earth as if drilling into memory to bring someone back to their name. Do you know? Sometimes just a ring, a rusted dog tag is enough to break an entire family into tears after decades of silent waiting. Waiting in silence. Do you find it strange that so much of this story, from the forgotten bodies to the loved ones quietly waiting, unfolds in a silence that aches? And then there is another kind of memory, another kind of war. Dead. Not everyone who fell in battle died there. Some survived, came back, but their souls remained somewhere along the line of fire. They still breathe, still eat, still pay bills. But every night when they close their eyes, they are back in the foxhole, hearing the whine of artillery, smelling burnt flesh, and seeing the face of a comrade left behind. Have you ever heard someone say, "He came home, but he wasn't the same. That's it"? They too are unburied bodies. The only difference is they still have form, but no resting place within. And perhaps as you listen to this story, you're doing something far greater than learning history. You are doing the work of a burial, not with a shovel, but with awareness, with presence, with reverence, with the quiet whisper in your mind, "I remember you. I never met you, but I remember." You see, war does not always end when the guns fall silent. Some wounds take generations to heal. Some bodies need many dreams before they find a grave. And now, as you lie there hearing my voice in the rhythm of the fan and the dim golden glow of the nightlight, you've become part of that healing process. I don't know who you are, where you're from, or what you've lived through, but I know this: you are patient enough to sit still and listen to a silence that has lasted for millennia, a silence many can't bear for more than 3 minutes. And if you dream tonight, I hope you don't just see battlefields, but a field full of white flowers. Each flower is someone who once fell, and each of them now has been remembered by you. Have you ever heard of the Maya and the Inca? Maybe you know them through ancient stone temples, stairways to the sky, and curses woven into movies. But few have told you that death after war in these cultures wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a sacred journey. For the Maya, death wasn't merely a loss, it was a transformation. They believed the soul of a fallen warrior continued on through the underworld, navigating its many layers to reach rebirth or to merge with the gods of war. After each battle, the Maya didn't rush to gather the dead and bury them underground, like in the West. They performed rituals that lasted many days, sometimes weeks. The body of a fallen warrior would be washed in sacred herbal water, then placed in a closed room, surrounded by incense smoke and steady prayers beating like the pulse of the jungle. Here's something special: they didn't view death as failure. On the contrary, dying in battle, especially as a warrior sacrifice, was an honor. It was believed that the blood of the brave would please the gods, ensuring good rains and fertile harvests. The strangest story: some bodies weren't buried right away. They were seated in combat poses, heads tilted, hands gripping weapons, eyes left open, and kept like that for days sometimes, until the body dried and became a sacred figure. These figures were placed in tombs or sacred places like gatekeepers to the other world. The Maya also had the custom of placing jade masks over the faces of the dead. These masks were intricately carved, adorned with gems, and bore symbols of power and rebirth. It wasn't just about preserving the face from decay. It was about identifying the soul in the divine realm. Wearing the mask was a way of declaring, "I am no longer human. I am a symbol." If the Maya leaned toward ritual, the Inca, the mountain dwellers of the Andes, wove death into their social structure. After war, they had a tradition so strange, you might think him telling a fairy tale, living mummification, preserving the dead just after death, or even as death approached. To the Inca, fallen warriors, especially those of high status or victorious glory, were chosen to become Malquis, living ancestors. These bodies were dried by placing them at high altitudes, exposed to the mountain winds for weeks, and rubbed with natural herbs to prevent decay. Afterward, the bodies were wrapped in fabric, decorated with feathers, necklaces, and kept inside homes. You didn't mishear. They kept the bodies in their homes. And on major feast days, they brought them out, seated them on chairs, dressed them in fine clothes, even offered corn beer by pouring a few drops into their slightly open mouths. This might sound eerie to you, but to the Inca, it was connection. They believed their ancestors never left them. They had only shifted form, and it was the living's role to maintain that bond through reverence, ritual, and physical presence. Historians still argue fiercely over the true meaning of this custom. Some say it was about power, keeping the body of a leader as a way to reassure the people. Others believe it was simply affection, that the Inca were so deeply bonded to their ancestors, they could not let them go. But the essence is no different. We all don't want our loved ones to leave empty-handed. And there's one more thing. Something you, the one lying here listening to this story, may have never noticed it. Many civilizations, including the Maya and the Inca, believe that the dead still listen. They still know who speaks their name, who visits, who whispers something beside the grave, and who still remembers. What are you thinking right now? Has anyone in your life ever passed away before you had a chance to say goodbye? If so, then this very moment, in the stillness of night, in the softness of this story, you can think of them. Call their name in your mind. No one else needs to know, just you and them. The Maya believed the soul could return when called by name. The Inca believed the ancestors were always near in the winds, the mountains, and the dreams. And you, what do you believe? Whether you believe it or not, I want to tell you this. You are performing a ritual. No fire, no smoke, no drums or chants. Just by being open to stories like this, you have become a keeper of memory for the living and for those who've long gone. We've spoken of fallen warriors, of the strange rituals of the Maya, of meditating mummies on high peaks among the Inca, and of the buried items meant to ensure the dead don't go empty-handed. But there's one thing we haven't yet said. What happens when the mountain itself, the forest, or an entire ancient city is seen as a living tomb? In In the cultures of pre-Columbian civilizations, not only the Maya and Inca, but also the Zapotec, Moche, and Chachapoya landscapes were not just scenery. They were the dwelling places of the dead. The mountain was the father, the forest the mother, the stone memory, and every place had its own soul, alive and listening. Underground tunnels have been found running through layers of earth beneath Inca temples, not for hiding or storing treasure, but to guide the souls of the dead in the right direction. Each tunnel symbolized a spiritual state's sorrow, release, rebirth. In some places, bodies were hidden within high cliff faces and crevices just large enough to hold a person sitting with knees drawn to chest. When you look up from a distance, it seems as if dozens of people are silently guarding the valley centuries after their death. And in some traditions, the living never turn their backs on those cliffs, not even by accident. Because turning your back on the dead is turning your back on your own origin. You see, in those cultures, death was not cut off from life. It wasn't locked in hospitals, cemeteries, or the dark corners of memory. It was present everywhere, but not to haunt, to accompany. And then there is a strange concept that you can only truly feel when you are very still. The Inca had a word called aini, a sacred balance between giving and receiving. When someone dies, they leave their soul to the mountain, and the living offer gifts to the mountain in return. No one owes. No one disappears. Everything is transfer from one breath to the next. Sounds a bit like meditation, doesn't it? A bit. But deeper. Because it includes emotion, fear, reverence, and the understanding that you are not the center of the universe. I know in the modern world we've lost much of that sense. We live fast, die quickly, and often bury memory alongside the person who passed. But tonight, you paused everything. No more phones. No more to-do lists. Just you and my voice telling of a world where death was held as something sacred. Have you ever wondered, if you had lived in those times, how would you be buried? Would you be seated, eyes facing the rising sun? Would someone lay a jade mask over your face so you wouldn't get lost crossing to the other world? Would someone place something small in your hand, a bell, a shard of mirror, a folded message in a leaf? And if no one would do that for you, would you do it for someone else? That is why we tell stories, not to learn an interesting fact, but to awaken a part of the ritual that's fallen asleep. When you listen, when you remember, when you tell it again, you are retying the invisible thread between the living and the dead. No need for stone temples, no need for sacred fire. Just a quiet evening and a heart unafraid to face fragility. Now take a deep breath and exhale slowly. It feels as if the air itself carries the scent of incense, the dampness of earth, and the faint sound of ceremonial drums long silenced. You're still there, aren't you? Good, because I still have more to tell. A moment ago I mentioned Egypt, and maybe in your mind the familiar images have already appeared. Pyramids, mummies, colossal sphinx statues, and mysterious hieroglyphs carved deep into stone, as if to challenge time itself. But do you know what truly made the ancient Egyptians special? It wasn't just that they built tombs the size of cities. It was their belief that death wasn't an ending, but a test. A complex journey filled with traps, trials, and one you could only pass if your heart was light enough. Not light because you ate clean, but light because you had lived right. The Egyptians called it Mat, the principle of balance, justice, and truth. When a person died, they would stand before Osiris, and their heart would be placed on a scale. On the other side of the scale was a feather, the symbol of Mat. If your heart was heavier than the feather, it meant you had lived wrongly, deceitful, selfish, violent, disloyal. And the consequence, your soul would be devoured by a beast with the body of a lion, the head of a crocodile, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Yes, you heard that right. It was Egypt's version of eternal shame. But if your heart was lighter than the featherlight, because you had lived with honesty, kindness, fairness, you would be allowed to enter the field of reeds, a peaceful paradise, where the soul lived on forever in serenity. The Egyptians spent their lives preparing for that test. They wrote the Book of the Dead, not for decoration, but as a survival guide for the afterlife. Imagine it living in such a way that when you died, you could pass through 12 gates, outsmart fiery serpents, avoid traps set by hungry spirits, and still carry a pure heart. And here's what impresses me most. The Egyptians didn't believe in eternal punishment in a cruel or vengeful sense. They believed that those who failed the test after death were simply people who hadn't learned how to live while they were alive. It wasn't divine wrath. It was just that you weren't light enough. Do you feel connected to that? We live in a time of constant pressure, deadlines, bills, expectations, headlines, comparisons, fear. Maybe your heart has been growing heavier day by day, not because you're bad, but because you're tired. But tonight, as you lie there listening to me speak about those who face death as if sitting for an exam, you're being reminded. Your heart deserves to be light again. No scales, no gods, just stillness. Like now. You know, some Egyptian mummies have been found after more than 3,000 years, still with hair teeth and traces of a smile. Researchers have analyzed them, asking why the smile in death. No one is certain, but I think maybe they knew they had lived well enough to not fear the weighing. And if tonight you sleep peacefully, not because you're perfect, but because you've tried to live truthfully, then your heart is already lighter. Lighter than a feather. I hope you dream of walking through a cold stone hallway with golden light pouring through a crack in the pyramid ceiling. You walk slowly, and at the end of that hallway, there is no monster, no punishment, only a door that opens onto fields bathed in sunlight and laughter. That is the place you deserve to reach. Not because someone allowed it, but because you listened. You let your heart rest, relax, release its burdens with nothing more than a quiet evening. I'm still here, always ready to tell you the stories others have forgotten. But now, if your eyelids are beginning to grow heavy, don't resist it. Let your heart drift. Gently. Like a feather, you'll be sitting at the door at the end of that dream hallway, and when you return, another story will be waiting. About death, about life, and about the things still whispering in the wind, waiting for someone quiet enough to hear. Now that you've passed through pyramids, jade masks, and smiling mummies, I invite you into another land, one that may seem barren, but holds some of the most delicate memories of death, the desert. Not Egypt's desert anymore, but the lands of the nomadic tribes of North Africa and the Middle East, where there are no pyramids, no gravestones, no towering statues to keep watch. Only sand, wind, and figures drifting past each other like dreams. Have you ever wondered, how do nomads bury their dead when they have no fixed village, no cemetery? Not even time to stay. The answer is, they let the wind do the rest. When a nomad dies during a journey, there is no rush to cry. The body is cleansed with hot sand. Prayers are whispered softly because the desert needs no loud voices. Then, the body is wrapped in the only cloth they owned, often the scarf they wore all their life. Then a shallow grave is dug quickly, quietly, and the loved one is buried facing the holy place they believe is the beginning and end of all souls. No stone, no marker. Because the desert will erase all traces with just a few gusts of wind. Sounds sad, but nomads don't see it that way. They believe death in the desert is a return to their dusty origin. From dust we came, and to dust we shall return. Not as a punishment, but as a gentle circle. For them, death doesn't need to be remembered in stone. It's remembered in stories. The departed are retold around the campfire through the voices of the living. When someone speaks your name during tea under cold wind, your soul is still there. I think that's something we sometimes forget today. That some people don't need a grave or a photo or elaborate memorials. They just need to be mentioned. Once. In a warm voice. So softly. And tonight, though you wear no desert scarf, though you sit beside no ancient fire, are performing that very ritual. You are listening, feeling, allowing yourself to connect with a nameless memory, just through this quiet rhythm of storytelling. And the beautiful truth is every culture, no matter the religion, the geography, or the language, shares one thing. They fear a death unremembered, and they cherish a life retold. Even civilizations that have vanished, like the Nabateans or the ancient Amazigh tribes left behind, stories carved into stone, etched into mountain walls, or passed mouth to mouth through generations. No one needed to be famous. No one needed to be immortal. They just needed someone to listen. And you are that someone. Now, if you feel your mind a little quieter, if your heart has softened and you sense a nameless peace, then I want you to know this. That is your doing. Not the story. Not me. It's you who opened your heart. You didn't rush to turn off the video, didn't scroll past. You paused. You listened. You remembered. And that in any religion, myth, or culture is a sacred act. So now, if your head has started to lean gently into the pillow, if your eyes no longer stretch open, if my voice now feels like little more than a thin breath, then just let yourself drift. No need to remember everything. No need to summarize. No need to share just yet. Just sleep with a light heart, a deep mind, and a soul that's just been watered by 3,000 years of human memory. And because you're still listening, or maybe only a part of you is still floating between fragile dream, I will keep the rhythm of the tale steady, like the oar of an old boat gliding through mist, carrying you forward into the next land of this journey, ancient Greece. You already know the Greeks did not believe death was the end. They called the place the dead go Hades, an underworld dark but not necessarily hellish. Their souls continued to exist, but only if they had the right offerings to pass through the gate. The question is, what gate? The answer, the river Styx. A river flowing between the world of the living and the world of the dead. To cross it, you needed a ferryman. His name was Charon. Silent, without much to say, and absolutely not free. The Greeks believed every dead person had to be buried with a coin placed under the tongue or on the eyelids. That coin was the fare. Without it, you'd be stranded on the riverbank, wandering forever, never crossing to the other side. And if you're thinking, oh, it's just myth, you might be surprised. Because archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of ancient Greek tombs where the body lay turned slightly, the lips slightly parted, and beneath the tongue, a tiny silver obol. Sometimes there was nothing left but bits of bone, but the coin was still there, quiet, faintly gleaming. It wasn't just ritual, it was a message. A way for the living to say to the dead, we are not letting you go alone. And you know, there's a detail few noticed: not everyone was sent to Hades. Some, if they lived with great integrity or died a heroic death or caught the attention of the gods, were sent to Elysium, the Greek version of paradise, with trees and wind and poetry. There the soul no longer had to fight, no longer had to remember, no longer had to endure punishment. Only light and peace. A rare few others, the tyrants, the betrayers, the murderers, the god insulters, were cast into Tartarus, the deepest layer of the underworld. There they were punished. But the worst part was not the torment, it was being forgotten. Do you see the pattern? Whether it's Egypt, Inca, Maya, or Greece, death is never as frightening as being forgotten. The worst thing is not to fall, but to fall and no one remembers you ever stood. And that is why the Greeks wrote poetry for the dead. They composed epitaphs, grave verses not to boast, but to say something simple. This person once lived, once loved, and now they rest. Have you ever wondered if you died, what would someone write on your grave? This person worked hard for 30 years, and then that was it. Or this person once sat through a long night's tale about civilizations no one mentions anymore. Maybe no one would write anything at all. And you know what? That's okay. Because the very act of you listening right now on a night that seemed anonymous has made you part of a collective memory larger than any gravestone. You are a witness. You are a keeper of the flame. And if someone is wandering the far bank of the Styx without a coin, without a farewell, maybe tonight you've changed that by remembering, by breathing, by giving them a seat in your mind. Now, if your eyes are still open, let your gaze slow down. Imagine yourself sitting in a small boat drifting on still waters, and Karen, the old ferryman, says, "Nothing, just holds out his hand." You place the coin there. And not just because you're crossing to the other side, but because you know someone somewhere once told you this story. I am that storyteller. You are the listener. And the miracle is, we just brought a world back to life with nothing more than steady breath and the quiet of a deep night. I won't stop here, because after Greece there is still Rome. Then the Viking warriors buried with ships and fire. Then the modern military cemeteries where every grave is a whisper. And beyond that, there is you. Because one day when someone tells your story, they will need a keeper of tales, and I hope there will be someone like you also listening. Also remembering, also falling asleep, and if you're still here quietly breathing steadily, your eyes either closed or drifting in the gentle dark, then I will keep telling. Because somewhere deep in the human soul there is something strange and beautiful. We do not fear the dark as long as someone is telling a story beside us. As promised tonight, we'll turn to a new land, ancient Rome. No longer the boats of Charon drifting through Styx fog, but long straight stone roads, monuments defying time, and tombs built like villas. Because the Romans didn't want death to be something ugly. They wanted it to be designed, and more than that, remembered. You might not believe it, but in ancient Rome, death was an expression of status. The wealthy built lavish tombs lined with marble, adorned with statues of gods, and inscribed with epitaphs so long you'd have to stand and read for an entire afternoon to finish. And the poor, they couldn't afford mausoleums, but they had something called collegia funeratica funeral societies. Each month they'd contribute a small amount, and when one member passed, the group would take on the burial, hold the ceremony, recite poetry, even hire mourners to weep. You see, even those with the least refused to go alone. And there was one Roman tradition that's strange, but also deeply human. Writing a will that specified how they wanted to be buried. Not everyone wanted a grand tomb. Some just asked for a shrub to be planted by their grave. One wrote, "Bury me near my horse, for he was my only friend." When you read those words, death no longer feels frightening. It feels tender, raw, and achingly beautiful. And if you ask, did the Romans believe in an afterlife? The answer is yes, but not like the Greeks. They didn't imagine hell and heaven. They believed in shadows. The shadows of the dead still walked among the living, whispering, reminding. So every year in February, the Romans held a festival called Parentalia, a remembrance of ancestors. For 9 days, people brought flowers, wine, and sweet cakes to the tombs, sitting beside the dead as if they were still alive. No crying, no wailing, just conversation. And do you know what the strangest part was? The Romans believed that if you didn't speak of the dead, they would become lemurs, wandering spirits, sad and angry. So storytelling, keeping their names alive, wasn't just affection. It was a duty, You're doing that right now in the night. You're listening, and in doing so, you are rescuing countless names long buried beneath the dust of history. And as I tell you this, perhaps you're beginning to feel something very deep, very strange, very ancient, but familiar, that you are not alone. Not because of me, but because you are connecting with thousands who once lived, once died, once loved, once were remembered through your very ears, through your steady breath in this moment. Would you like to go further, beyond Rome? Beyond the stone roads and coins beneath tongues, then we'll head north, to the snow-covered forests of northern Europe, where flames dance on frozen lakes, and Viking warriors did not fear death, they longed for it. Because to them dying in battle meant being chosen for Valhalla. A great fiery hall where each night the soul would feast, sing, and reforge weapons preparing for the final battle of the world. And if you can picture that, a Viking fallen in the snow axe, still gripped in hand, eyes open to the icy sky, then tonight you have come a very long way with me. But even further still there is more civilizations, more deaths left untold, more souls whose names have never been spoken. And I believe you'll stay to listen. We don't tell these stories to feel sad, not to feel fear, but to understand every life holds value even after it is ended. Do you remember what I promised? That we would leave the cold forests of the Vikings, cross the ocean, and dive beneath the surface, where cemeteries have no stones, no flowers, and no visitors. Welcome to the bottom of the sea, the largest burial ground humanity has ever created unintentionally. You know, for thousands of years, every time a ship sank, whether a merchant vessel, a warship, or a migration boat, it left behind not just rotting wood and treasure, but bodies, never recovered, never laid in coffins, never given a farewell. They are called the nameless graves beneath the ocean. Take, for example, the sinking of the Titanic. Everyone remembers the iceberg, the ring, the final song, but few recall that over 500 people were never found. They remain there among kelp, fish, and cold sand, no tombstone. Only a deep, dark, endless sea. And during World War II, thousands of ships were sunk. Each carried not just cargo, but people, dreams, memories, and a final breath no one ever heard. Marine archaeologists never say they dig graves. They call it dialogue with silence. I love that phrase. Dialogue with silence. Because perhaps sometimes the greatest respect we can offer the dead is not a dazzling monument, but a gentle quiet, presence, listening. And if you're lying here in your little room, between the steady hum of a fan and the warmth of a comforter, then you are listening too, not just to me, but to the voices that were never spoken aloud. The young sailors dreaming of shore, the passengers clutching their children as the ship trembled one last time. The broken promises, the letters never sent, the birthday gifts swept away by salt water. All of it still drifts in the belly of the sea, and tonight you've touched them not with hands, but with your stillness. Can you see it now? History doesn't just live in books. It breathes in feeling. In nights like this, when you don't need to see, you only need to feel. And I know you might be thinking, I'm just an ordinary person listening to sleep. What difference can I make? But you're wrong. You just did something the world has long forgotten. You paused. You were silent, and you listened. Not everyone can do that. Now I want to take you higher. From the cold seabed we rise to towering cliffs where the wind howls through the stone crevices to find hanging coffins. Yes, coffins. Hanging. In certain mountainous regions of China, the Philippines, and Indonesia, there exists a tradition so ancient it almost defies belief. The dead are not buried in the ground. They are hung toward the sky, Wooden coffins tied with rattan ropes are placed on rock ledges or fastened directly into cliff faces so high only birds can reach them. Why? Because they believe the closer to the heavens, the easier it is for the soul to ascend. And they also believe that burying someone in the earth is suppression. It is imprisonment. But raising them up is release. Some of these coffins have been there for hundreds of years. Wind has carved through the wood. Rain has peeled away the paint. Yet the bodies remain wrapped in linen cheeks, still pressed close to the contours of a child, a mother, an elder. When researchers ask the locals, why hang them like that? Why not keep them in a temple or build a solid tomb? The old ones simply smiled and said, because on the ground people would step on them without knowing. That answer, as simple as a lullaby, carries the weight of a bell echoing through the valley. And if you understand that you're not just listening to a story, you are awakening a part of your humanity long asleep in your heart. Now then, are you tired yet? Let me hold the rest of the story. I'm not going anywhere. While you sleep, you'll sit here among the souls, hanging on cliffs, resting on the ocean floor, and beside you, keeping watch like a silent temple guard. Tomorrow, when you wake, we'll continue. About nameless battlefields, about the ghosts in the Amazon, and about how a single hug after war can sometimes heal more than history. Sleep well. The night is still long, and I am still here. And I know in some way you are still here too. Even if your eyes are gently closed, even if your breath has deepened steady as distant waves brushing the edges of memory. You don't need to answer. You don't need to open your eyes. Just let the voice continue, softly, slowly, like a fingertip tracing circles on still water. Tonight we've traveled together through so many strange places. From the pyramids of Egypt to Viking ships, from quiet cemeteries under the sea to coffins suspended in air. But there is one place we haven't spoken of. Not a land, but a moment. The moment after war. You see, when people talk about war, they speak of gunfire, of generals, of signing treaties. But few speak of the moment after, when the smoke is cleared, the dead are still, and the living are left standing amid ruins, not knowing what to do with their empty hands. And so, there are hugs. Not the gentle romantic ones seen in films, but the final, fragile ones between survivors. A soldier embracing his comrade not in victory, but in disbelief that both still breathe. A mother holding her returning child not in joy, but because his body has changed. His eyes, his voice, his spirit seem to have been left somewhere on the front line. You might call it PTSD. The Japanese call it mono-no. Aware the beautiful sadness of witnessing something fade. In the West, it's often named the ghost of war. But I call it resonance. Resonance is what lingers after all sound has faded. Like hearing the train whistle in your head long after it's left the station. And the hug after war, though undocumented, unmemorialized, is the final silent ritual of a civilization crawling back from the abyss. Do you know, in Rwanda, after the 1994 genocide, there were programs called Planting Together. Not to green the land, but to have former enemies dig one hole together, plant one small tree together, and watch it grow day by day. Why? Because no one can embrace right after they've killed each other. But people can care for something that is still alive. A sapling, a child. A memory that hasn't gone out. In Cambodia, after the Khmer Rouge genocide, villagers didn't build monuments. They built small houses where anyone could enter, light incense, and sit in silence. No need to speak, no need to cry, just sit. Because sometimes the presence of another is the only way to get through pain too vast for words. Are you thinking of someone now? Someone you've lost, or a part of yourself that fell away during some private war? If so, you don't need to do anything. No need to stand. No need to write a letter, no need to call. Just remember, and hold them in your thoughts, because as every civilization has whispered to us throughout this night, the dead are not truly gone, as long as the living keep the softest part of them, their name, their smile, or a single embrace. Now then, does your pillow feel a little softer? Do you feel your body growing heavier, but your mind somehow lighter? That's because you've just set down an invisible burden, wrapped it in a story, and offered it to the place where every soul eventually passes through silence. It'll sit a little longer. Wait for you to fall deeply asleep. Because tomorrow night, well, speak of traveling coffins, those not buried, but sent off by fire, by water, by sky. There will be snowy mountains where bodies slowly disappear with the seasons. There will be boats set adrift into the sunset with former lovers aboard. There will be winds that carry ashes to places no one could ever name. But tonight, just sleep. No more thoughts, no more journeys. You'll keep watch, and when you wake, well, continue.